You know, think about the last thing you actually learned. Was it a new recipe, maybe a random fact from a documentary you watched? Learning is so fundamental to who we are, we barely even notice we're doing it half the time. So, today we're going to pull back the curtain and really dig into how our experiences shape, well, everything, from our simplest habits to our deepest, darkest fears. So let's start with the most basic question of all. How do we learn? It seems so simple, right? But how do we actually go from not knowing something to knowing it? From being clumsy at a new skill to doing it without even thinking? And what about our emotions? I mean, why does the simple sound of a dentist's drill make you feel anxious before you're even in the chair? Or, why does a child who's never been bitten by a dog sometimes develop this powerful, overwhelming fear of them? And maybe the biggest question of all, are we just kind of passively soaking up the world around us? Or can our actions, our habits, and our skills be intentionally shaped and molded by the consequences that follow them? Okay, let's get right into it. Psychologists have a very specific definition for learning. They call it a relatively permanent change in behavior resulting from experience. Now, that might sound a little dry, but this definition is our absolute foundation. It's so key because it totally takes learning out of the classroom and shows us that, hey, it's happening all the time in literally every single interaction we have with our environment. So here's our roadmap for this whole explainer. We're going to start with the basics, then we'll explore the big theories, learning by linking things together, learning from what happens after we act, and of course, the huge role our own minds and observations play. And then we'll wrap it all up with some practical strategies you can actually use to become a better learner. Okay, first things first. Before we jump into all the cool experiments, we need to get crystal clear on what actually counts as learning in psychology. And maybe just as important, what doesn't. All right, let's unpack that definition a bit. Relatively permanent is a key phrase. It separates real learning from temporary stuff, like being tired or just being in a mood. The change has to come from experience, what you do, what you see, what you feel. And this isn't just about growing up. It's the process that lets us adapt to a constantly changing world. Honestly, it's a crucial skill for survival. And this slide, it just nails the difference perfectly. A baby learning to walk, right? That's maturation. It just happens when their body's ready, kind of like following a built-in biological clock. But learning to tell red from blue, now that requires experience. It requires practice and feedback from the world. That, right there, is learning. So psychologists often break learning down into these four basic buckets. You've got motor learning, that's all your physical skills. Then there's verbal learning, which is all about language. Concept learning is our amazing ability to create categories, like knowing that a tiny Chihuahua and a giant Great Dane are both, somehow, dogs. And finally, discrimination learning is all about telling things apart, like knowing a green light means go and a red one definitely means stop. So how does our brain actually make all these connections? Well, our first big stop on this journey is with the famous physiologist Ivan Pavlov, who, believe it or not, stumbled upon a massively powerful form of learning while he was studying something else completely, dog digestion. Okay, so before any training, the situation is totally natural. You've got food, which Pavlov called the unconditioned stimulus, and it makes a dog salivate. That drool is an automatic, unlearned reflex. He called it the unconditioned response. No learning required here, at all. Now, what if you just ring a bell? Well, nothing happens. To the dog, that bell is just a neutral stimulus. It's just noise. Yeah, it might get the dog's attention, but it doesn't make it drool. It's totally meaningless when it comes to food. But this is where the magic happens. Pavlov started ringing the bell right before giving the dogs their food. Bell, then food. Bell, then food. Over and over and over again. He was building a predictable association in their minds. The bell started to become a signal that food was coming. And boom, there it is. After enough pairings, the bell alone is enough to make the dog salivate. That once neutral sound has been totally transformed into a conditioned stimulus, and it triggers a new, learned behavior, the conditioned response. The dog's brain has literally forged a new connection. Pavlov also found some really fascinating rules about how this works. Acquisition is that initial learning phase. Now, if you start ringing the bell but stop bringing the food, the drooling response fades away. That's called extinction. But, and this is weird, after a little break, the response might suddenly pop back up. That's spontaneous recovery. The dogs also generalized, meaning they drool to similar sounds, but they could also learn to discriminate, responding only to that one specific bell. Okay, so this works on dogs, but what about us? Does this apply to humans? Well, a behaviorist named John B. Watson absolutely thought so. And he set up this famous and frankly pretty controversial experiment. He took a 9-month-old baby, who we now know as little Albert, and showed him a fuzzy white rat. At first, Albert wasn't scared at all. But then, every single time Albert reached for that rat, Watson would sneak up and strike a steel bar with a hammer, making this terrifyingly loud noise. As you can imagine, it didn't take long before just the sight of the white rat made little Albert cry in fear. Watson had successfully conditioned an emotional response. But this brings up a huge question that still echoes through psychology today. Just because you can do an experiment, should you? There is no way this study would ever be approved by an ethics board today. Now, a related and kind of darker discovery is something called learned helplessness. A researcher named Martin Seligman found that dogs who were repeatedly exposed to shocks they couldn't escape would later on not even try to escape when they were given the chance. It's like they had learned that their actions didn't matter. This became a really powerful concept for helping psychologists understand aspects of human depression, where people might feel like they have no control and just stop trying to change their situation. Okay, let's switch gears to a whole different kind of learning. This isn't about associating two different things, like a bell and food. No, this is about learning from the consequences of our own actions. Welcome to the world of B.F. Skinner and operant conditioning. He showed how even really complex behaviors could be built or shaped one small step at a time. Skinner's whole framework is built around two super simple questions. First, are we trying to make a behavior happen more often or less often? And second, are we adding something new to the situation or are we taking something away? This simple grid gives us the 4 basic tools for shaping pretty much any behavior. Let's make this real. Positive reinforcement is when you add something good to increase a behavior, like getting praise for a good grade. Positive punishment is when you add something bad to decrease a behavior, like getting a scolding. Now, the negatives can be tricky. Negative reinforcement removes something bad to increase a behavior. Think about taking an aspirin to get rid of a headache. You're more likely to do that again, right? And negative punishment removes something good to decrease a behavior, like a kid losing their phone privileges. And Skinner also discovered something really cool. The pattern of reinforcement totally matters. It's not just that you get a reward, it's when. A fixed ratio schedule rewards you after a set number of actions. A fixed interval is all about time, like getting a monthly salary. But the real kicker? It's the variable ratio schedule. This is the one that powers lotteries, slot machines, you name it. It's considered the most powerful, the most resistant to quitting, because that total unpredictability is what keeps us hooked. But come on, we know learning isn't just about automatic reflexes and external rewards. We have minds, right? We think, we interpret, and, this is a big one, we learn by watching other people. So that brings us to cognitive and social learning. The great Albert Bandura argued that we learn a massive amount simply by watching others, who he called models. This is called observational learning, or sometimes vicarious learning. In his legendary Bobo doll experiment, he had kids watch a video of an adult just wailing on this inflatable doll. And later, when those same kids were put in a room with the doll, you guessed it, they mimicked the exact aggressive behaviors they had just watched. Now, Bandura was quick to point out this isn't just monkey see, monkey do. It's a whole cognitive process. First, you have to actually pay attention to what the person is doing. Then you have to retain that information in your memory. You also need the physical ability to reproduce the action yourself. And finally, you need some kind of motivation to actually do it. All 4 of those steps are absolutely essential. And there are 2 other really fascinating cognitive theories. The first is latent or hidden learning. Edward Tolman showed that rats could learn the layout of a maze without any reward at all, but they didn't show that they learned it until he introduced a reward. In total contrast, you have Wolfgang Kuller's insight learning. He observed a chimp named Sultan who was just sitting there, totally frustrated, unable to reach a banana. Then, all of a sudden, he had this aha moment, stacked some boxes, climbed up, and got his prize. It wasn't trial and error, it was a sudden cognitive breakthrough. Okay, we have covered a ton of theory. So what's the point? How can we actually put all of this into practice? How can we use this science to become better, more effective learners in our own lives? Well, the science gives us some pretty clear roadmaps. First, use mental imagery. Our brains are wired for visuals, so creating a vivid picture in your mind is way more powerful than just reading words on a page. Second, when you're studying, go beyond simple repetition. That's just maintenance. Instead, use what's called elaborative rehearsal. Actively connect the new stuff to what you already know. Ask yourself why it makes sense. And finally, get organized. Our brains are pattern-seeking machines, so grouping related information into meaningful chunks makes it so much easier to remember. So there you have it. We've gone from the simple drool of Pavlov's dogs all the way to the complex aha moments of chimpanzees, and finally, to how you can apply these incredible principles yourself. Learning is the engine of change. It is constantly shaping who you are. So, I guess the only question left is, what are you going to learn next?